All right, we leave you tonight with a special edition of Words, a look at what words are trending and why. But in this installment, we also have Oxford Dictionary's Word of the Year. Can you guess what it is?
Words! Words!
The most looked up word of the last 2 weeks on Merriam-Webster.com is gaslight.
Gaslight.
It's a term that's been tossed around quite a bit with the public relations strategies of the White House this year. But it was this tweet from New York Times writer Benjamin Applebaum that really created a spark. He writes, quote, "I don't know what the word gaslighting means, but I wish everybody would stop using it. There are plenty of actual English words," end quote. He's wrong. It is a word. By definition, gaslighting is to attempt to make someone believe that he or she is going insane by subjecting that person to a series of experiences that have no rational explanation. Trickery and evil bending of the mind. It comes from a 1938 play called Gaslight, which was actually made into 2 movies, where a man tries to trick his wife into make her think that she's going insane.
I consider it to be an invasion.
As you know, Mr. President, the caravan was not an invasion.
Next up, invasion. Literally the act of invading. Figuratively, it means the spread of something usually hurtful, but it's been used in warmer contexts like the Beatles and the Stones, which is the British invasion of music in the 1960s.
Invasion.
And now, Oxford Dictionary came out with their word of the year. And it is toxic. Everybody knows its meaning as poisonous, but in society today, it's been paired up with other words in myriad ways. None of them good. Like toxic chemical, which people looked up after a former Russian spy and his daughter were poisoned with a nerve agent in England. There's toxic gas and toxic waste, looked up after the hurricanes pummeled the South and East Coast this year. Not to mention toxic algae, which came up in Florida this year. And last but not least, toxic masculinity. With the rise of the Me Too movement and the Senate Judiciary Committee's blockbuster confirmation hearing of Judge Kavanaugh spiked lookups and the popularity of the term. Sorry to leave you on a toxic note, but have a great weekend, everybody.
Words!
Have a great weekend, everybody. Thanks for joining us.